Betrayed and pushed from a cliff by her own husband, a pregnant woman survives the impossible and is reborn with a thirst for justice. While the country mourns the false widow left behind by the millionaire, she prepares in secret to expose the empire of lies that almost killed her. And on the day of judgment, when she appears alive before the man who tried to erase her, the truth changes everything, forever. If you enjoy stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening from. The ocean breeze drifted through the open windows of the penthouse in South Beach, bringing the scent of salt and the promise of another sunny day in Miami. Amelia Vance awoke to the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore and, for a brief moment, felt that sense of fulfillment that had become increasingly rare. At 28, she had left behind a promising career as an architect to marry Edward Martin, a real estate entrepreneur whose influence stretched along the entire Florida coast. The wedding, celebrated 3 years ago in a lavish ceremony in the Florida Keys, seemed to have been torn from the pages of a magazine. Everyone commented on what a perfect couple they were. Edward was already at the office when she came down for breakfast. The housekeeper, Mrs. Celia, had prepared everything as usual: fresh fruit, warm croissants, freshly squeezed orange juice. Amelia sat alone at the large dining table, observing the empty apartment. The white walls decorated with contemporary art, the imported designer furniture, the marble floor that reflected the morning light. Everything perfect, everything impeccable, everything far too quiet. In the first months of their marriage, Edward had insisted she didn't need to work. "I want to take care of you," he would say, wrapping her in his arms. "You deserve to rest, to enjoy life. Let me handle everything." At first, Amelia found it romantic. After years of chasing projects, dealing with difficult clients and impossible deadlines, the idea of a break seemed tempting. But the break turned into months, then years, and when she wanted to resume her career, Edward always had an excuse. "Now isn't the right time. The market is complicated. Why don't you relax a little more?" The excuses were always accompanied by expensive gifts, international trips, dinners at exclusive restaurants, as if that could compensate for the growing emptiness she felt. Her friends from college gradually drifted away. Edward had never liked them much, always finding subtle flaws. "Isn't that Julia a bit of a gossip? Rob is always asking you for favors." Amelia tried to defend her friendships, but the get-togethers became more sporadic, the invitations less frequent, until they practically ceased. Her family lived in Atlanta, and visits had also dwindled. Edward always had important commitments on weekends, business trips that couldn't be postponed. "Go by yourself if you want," he'd say, but Amelia knew it bothered him. She preferred to avoid conflict. She glanced at her phone, 8 in the morning and no messages. Edward usually left early and came home late. Meetings, business lunches, dinners with investors. His schedule was always full, while hers was increasingly empty. She finished her breakfast without an appetite and went up to the bedroom. That's when she saw the folder of documents on the dresser. Edward must have forgotten it. He was usually meticulous with his papers, but lately he had been more distracted, tense. He said it was problems with the development in Islamorada, nothing she needed to worry about. Amelia hesitated. She wasn't in the habit of going through his things. She respected his privacy just as he respected hers, or so she thought. She picked up the folder, just to put it in a more appropriate place, when a few papers slipped out. She bent down to pick them up and her eyes caught numbers, lots of zeros, debts, loans, names of companies she didn't recognize, and in the middle of it all, a property transfer agreement. Her name was there. Her condo from before they were married, which she had kept rented out all these years, had been used as collateral for a loan she had never authorized. Her heart raced. This had to be a mistake. Edward would never do something like this without consulting her. There had to be a rational explanation. There had to be. She put the papers back, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She spent the rest of the day restless, trying to convince herself it was paranoia, that she was seeing problems where none existed, but she couldn't get those numbers out of her head. That night Edward came home late, as always. He kissed her cheek distractedly. and went straight for a shower. During dinner, she tried to broach the subject delicately. "How's business? You've been so busy lately." He smiled, that rehearsed smile he used in meetings. "Everything's under control. You don't need to worry about these things." But Amelia noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed nervously on the table. He was hiding something. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Amelia started paying attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. The calls Edward took in another room, the texts he read and quickly deleted, the different perfume he sometimes had on his clothes. It must be from a client, she tried to convince herself, but suspicion grew like a shadow. It was then that she discovered she was pregnant. The positive test left her in shock. They hadn't been trying for children, but they weren't preventing it either. Edward always said that if it happened, it would be a blessing. Amelia looked at those two pink lines and felt a mixture of joy and fear. How would she tell him? Would this be the moment to strengthen their family, to bring Edward closer again? Or would it be another way to deepen her dependence? She decided to wait for the right moment to tell him, but the right moment never seemed to arrive. Edward was increasingly distant, more irritable. One night they argued over something trivial, a trip he had planned without consulting her. The argument escalated, and for the first time in 3 years of marriage, he raised his voice. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I'm supporting all of this life you love so much." Amelia fell silent, shaken. It wasn't the life she had chosen. It was the life he had built around her, like a gilded cage. The following week, Edward announced he needed to go to the Florida Keys to sort out some issues with a project. It would only be for a day. Amelia, already almost 2 months pregnant, decided she wouldn't say anything yet. She would wait for him to return in a calmer mood. But her intuition bothered her. Something was wrong, very wrong. It was on the day of the trip that everything changed. Edward left early, and Amelia was alone in the apartment. She tried to distract herself by organizing the closet, but ended up finding, in the pocket of one of his blazers, a receipt from a jewelry store. An expensive bracelet. Very expensive. Her stomach churned. She hadn't received any bracelet recently. The date on the receipt was from 2 weeks ago. Who was it for? Her hands trembled as she picked up his phone, which he had forgotten charging on the nightstand. She wasn't in the habit of invading his privacy, but something stronger than reason compelled her. The password. She knew the password. It was his birthday. The phone unlocked. Messages. Hundreds of messages. And a name that repeated, Jennifer. The conversations were unmistakable. They weren't professional messages. They were intimate, affectionate, even obscene. Amelia read every word with growing horror. The bracelet was for Jennifer. The business trips were rendezvous with Jennifer. The late nights, the absences, the excuses, it was all a lie. Edward had another life. A parallel life she knew nothing about. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. Amelia sat on the bed, still holding the phone, trying to process what she had just discovered. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of dedication, of giving up her career, her friends, her independence. And it was all a sham. She felt anger, pain, humiliation, but stronger than all of that, she felt fear. Fear of being pregnant and alone, fear of having wasted so much time, fear of what was to come. That's when she heard the front door open. Edward was back, but he wasn't alone. Voices. A woman's voice. They were laughing. Amelia hid in the closet, her heart beating so loudly she was sure it would give her away. Through the crack in the door, she saw Edward enter the bedroom with a brunette woman, beautiful, younger than her, Jennifer. They were kissing, uninhibited, as if they were home, as if Amelia didn't exist. "I have to resolve this soon," Edward was saying, loosening his tie. "She's becoming a problem. Too curious, asking questions about the finances." Jennifer laughed, a cold laugh. "Then speed up the plan. You already have the signatures you need, the assets are transferred. Now it's just a matter of time." Amelia froze. They were talking about her, about her assets, about a plan. "The trip to the Keys is set for Friday," Edward continued. "I'm going to take her to see the new development. It'll be romantic, a throwback to our wedding. She won't suspect a thing." Jennifer moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "And after?" Edward smiled, that smile Amelia knew so well, but which now seemed to carry a frightening coldness. "After, I'll finally be free. Free of her, free of the questions, free to start over with you." Amelia covered her mouth to keep from screaming. What were they planning? What was the plan that involved taking her to the Keys? Why did they need to get rid of her, and how? The questions swirled in her mind as she remained, motionless, hidden among the expensive clothes Edward had bought for her over the years. Every dress, every shoe, every handbag now seemed part of a carefully constructed illusion. They stayed in the room for a few more minutes, talking in low voices. Amelia couldn't hear all the details, but she caught fragments, something about insurance, about debts that would be settled, about an accident that wouldn't raise suspicion. The blood froze in her veins. She needed to get out of there. She needed to think. She needed to act. But how? Her assets were in Edward's name. Her friends were distant. Her family was in another state. She was completely vulnerable. When she finally heard them leave the room, Amelia waited long minutes before moving. Her legs were shaking when she stepped out of the closet. She looked around, at that luxurious room that had never really been hers, at that life she now understood was a carefully disguised prison. She picked up her phone with trembling hands and did the only thing that occurred to her. She started recording. Every conversation she could get, every piece of evidence she could gather. If Edward was plotting something against her, she needed proof. She needed protection. She needed to survive. That night, lying alone in bed after Edward finally left again with some lame excuse, Amelia placed a hand on her still flat stomach. There was a life growing there, a life she swore to protect at all costs. She didn't know exactly what Edward was planning, but she knew she was in danger. She and the baby she was carrying. For the first time in 3 years, Amelia Vance made a decision on her own. She would no longer be the docile, obedient wife. She would be a survivor. And she would do whatever it took to unmask the man she had once loved, and who now saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. The trip to the Keys was set for 3 days from now. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to understand his plan before it was too late. The 3 days leading up to the trip to the Florida Keys were the longest of Amelia's life. She maintained a facade of normalcy, smiling when Edward came home, preparing dinner with Mrs. Celia, making small talk. But inside she was on constant high alert. Every move he made was observed, every word weighed. Her phone, discreetly positioned in strategic places, captured conversations whenever possible. Amelia had become a spy in her own home. On Thursday night, the eve of the trip, Edward arrived earlier than usual. He brought flowers, red roses, the kind she used to love in their early dating days. "For my beautiful wife," he said, kissing her on the forehead. Amelia accepted the flowers with a forced smile, her stomach churning. Every gesture of affection now felt like a betrayal, a lie wrapped in gift paper. She knew this game. He was setting the stage, creating memories of a thoughtful husband, in case anyone investigated later, in case something went wrong, in case she didn't come back. "I'm excited for tomorrow," Edward continued, pouring himself some wine while she pretended to sip juice. "It's been a while since we've had time just for us. The Keys have always been special for us, haven't they?" Amelia nodded, remembering the wedding, the vows exchanged under the sunset, the promises of eternal love. How had it all turned into this nightmare? "We'll leave early," he added. "I want to show you a new spot, a property I'm developing. It has an incredible view of the ocean. You're going to love it. An incredible view of the ocean." The words echoed in Amelia's mind all night. She barely slept, imagining scenarios, trying to anticipate what was coming. In the morning, she packed a small bag, including important documents she had hidden in a secret pocket: her passport, certificates, copies of financial papers she had managed to make without Edward noticing. If something happened, she would need this evidence. She would need to prove who she was, what she had, what Edward had done. The car ride was quiet. Edward drove with concentration, listening to soft music on the radio, while Amelia gazed out the window, watching the familiar landscape of the overseas highway. They drove south through the Keys, finally arriving around noon. The area was as beautiful as ever, with its idyllic beaches and charming streets filled with tourists. But Amelia couldn't appreciate the beauty. Her heart was pounding, her senses on high alert. Edward parked in front of a boutique hotel. "Let's have lunch first," he said solicitously. "Then we'll go to the site. It's not too far from here." Amelia followed him to the restaurant, ordered a salad she barely touched, while he ate calmly, talking about future projects as if nothing was wrong. As if there wasn't a second life, a waiting mistress, a sinister plan in motion. His ability to pretend was terrifying. After lunch, they returned to the car. Edward took a secondary road, heading away from the more crowded beaches. The landscape became wilder, more isolated. Luxurious houses scattered on the hills gave way to dense vegetation and steep rocks. Amelia recognized the area. It was a more remote part of the Keys where land was expensive and construction was rare. The kind of place where no one would hear screams, where no one would see anything. "We're here," Edward announced, parking in a small clearing. They got out of the car, and Amelia saw they were at the top of a cliff. The view was indeed breathtaking. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out infinitely before them, waves crashing violently against the rocks below. The wind was strong, sharp, carrying sprays of salty foam. There were no buildings nearby, just raw, unforgiving nature. "This is where I plan to build an exclusive resort," Edward explained, pointing to different spots on the non-existent plot. "Imagine, Amelia, luxury villas with ocean views, a spa, a gourmet restaurant. It will be revolutionary." He spoke with enthusiasm, as if he truly believed what he was saying. Or maybe it was just another layer of his elaborate lie. Amelia walked to the edge of the cliff, looking down. It must have been about 100 feet to the rocks and water. A fall from there would be devastating, fatal. It was exactly the kind of place where accidents happened. "Come see from here," Edward called, already near the edge. Amelia hesitated but moved closer. He rapped, an arm around her shoulders, a gesture that once would have felt protective but now sent a chill down her spine. They were completely alone. No one knew exactly where they were. She hadn't told anyone about the trip. She no longer had close friends to notify. If something happened here, it would be his word against nothing. There would be no word from her. "Are you sure you want to build here?" Amelia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It seems dangerous, very isolated." Edward laughed, that laugh she used to find charming. "That's exactly why it's perfect. Total privacy. Guests will pay a fortune for it." He stepped away from her, moving even closer to the edge, looking down. Amelia watched his every move, his tense muscles, his calculated posture. Was he waiting for the right moment? Was he assessing the situation? What was going through his mind? Just then, Edward's phone rang. He answered, turning slightly. "Yes, I'm here. With her. Yes, everything's going according to plan." His voice dropped, but Amelia heard enough fragments. It was Jennifer, of course it was. She was on the other end, waiting for news, waiting for Edward to fulfill his part of the deal. Amelia felt rage rise mixed with fear. She would not be the passive victim he imagined. She would not allow their lives, hers and the baby's, to end on this cursed cliff. Discreetly, she took her own phone out of her pocket and started recording. If something was going to happen, at least it would be on record. At least there would be evidence. Edward hung up and turned to her, his expression unreadable. There was determination there, but also hesitation. Would he really do this? Was he truly capable of such a thing? "Amelia," he began, and there was something different in his voice, something final. "We need to talk." She swallowed hard. "About what?" He approached her again, and Amelia unconsciously took a step back, closer to the edge. "About us. About this marriage. About the future. The words were vague, but the tone was definitive. You changed my life when we met, he continued. But things have changed. I've changed. And I think you feel it too. Amelia forced herself to ask, though she already knew the answer. What are you saying, Edward? He sighed theatrically. I'm saying maybe we made a mistake. We got married too fast without thinking it through, and now, he gestured vaguely, now we're stuck in something that doesn't work anymore. So this was it. He was going to ask for a divorce here, in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses, no protection for her. Or was it something worse? And Jennifer? Amelia asked, deciding to confront him. Is she part of this future of yours? Edward froze. For a second, his perfect mask slipped, revealing surprise, then anger. How do you know about Jennifer? His voice became dangerously low. Amelia lifted her chin, defiant. I know a lot of things, Edward. I know about the debts. I know about the assets you transferred without my authorization. I know about the plans you two have for me. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the sound of the wind and the waves crashing on the rocks below. Edward took a step toward her, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and something Amelia couldn't identify. Panic. Desperation. You don't understand, he said, his voice tense. You have no idea the pressure I was under. The debts, the investors, everything was falling apart. I needed solutions. And I was the solution? Amelia felt tears threatening, but she held them back. She would not cry. Not now. My assets? My money? My life? Was all of that just a resource for you? Edward ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. It wasn't like that at the beginning. I loved you, Amelia. I really did. But then everything started to go wrong, and Jennifer showed up, and things got complicated. He spoke as if he were a victim of circumstances, as if he hadn't chosen every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation. And the plan was, what? Amelia pressed, even though she feared the answer. To bring me here and... She didn't finish the sentence. Edward looked away, unable to meet her gaze. It would have been an accident, he mumbled, so low Amelia almost didn't hear. You would have tripped, fallen. Unfamiliar terrain, strong wind, accidents happen. And I would have been free. Of the debts, the complications, of everything. The coldness with which he described it, the casual way he planned her exit, made Amelia take another step back, now dangerously close to the cliff's edge. It was then that Edward seemed to realize the absurdity of what he was saying. Or maybe it was the look on Amelia's face, the pure horror reflected in her eyes. He reached out a hand. Amelia, wait. I'm not going to... I can't do this. Please, get away from there. But it was too late. The truth was exposed between them, raw and terrible. Edward Martin had planned to get rid of her, and even if he was backing down now, even if hesitation had won, the damage was done. The trust, the love, everything was destroyed. Amelia didn't realize she was so close to the edge, until she felt the ground give way slightly beneath her feet. The cliff, eroded by years of wind and rain, had unstable points. She tried to steady herself, but the strong wind threw her off balance. Edward screamed something, reached out his arms, but he was too far. For a fraction of a second, Amelia thought of the baby, of the choices that had led her here, of the life she could have had. And then she was falling, tumbling down the steep cliff, sharp rocks tearing at her clothes and skin, the world spinning in a vortex of sky, stone, and sea. The cool Atlantic water swallowed her with brutal force. The current was strong, pulling her down, away from the shore. Amelia fought to reach the surface, swallowing salt water, feeling pain radiate through her entire body, but the survival instinct was stronger. She had to live, for the baby, for justice, for herself. She managed to break the surface, coughing, gasping, only to be pulled under by another wave. The coast seemed impossibly far. The cold was numbing her limbs. She was losing strength quickly. That's when she saw it. A light. A boat. Coming toward her. Had someone seen her fall? How? This place was completely isolated. Amelia tried to scream, to wave, but she could barely keep her head above water. The last thing she remembered before everything went dark was the feeling of strong arms pulling her from the sea, a man's voice saying, "Hang on, I've got you." And then the world faded into merciful blackness. When Amelia woke up, she didn't know where she was. The white ceiling above her was unfamiliar. The walls, the smell, everything was different. She tried to move, but pain exploded in every part of her body. She groaned softly, and a door immediately opened. A woman in scrubs entered, smiling gently. "Oh, you're awake. Good. How are you feeling?" Amelia tried to speak, but her throat was raw. The woman offered water. Slowly, small sips. After a few painful sips, Amelia managed to ask, her voice hoarse, "Where am I?" "You're in a private residence in the Keys," the woman explained. "A nurse, apparently. You were rescued from the sea 2 days ago. You were in serious condition, but you're stable now. You were very lucky." 2 days. Amelia processed the information slowly. "Who rescued me?" The nurse hesitated. "Mr. Alcott. He saw you fall and went to get you. If it weren't for him." She didn't finish the sentence, but Amelia understood. She would be gone. She and the baby. The baby. Her hand flew to her stomach. "My baby?" The nurse smiled reassuringly. "The baby is fine, strong heartbeat. You're about 2 months pregnant, correct?" Amelia nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. They had survived. Both of them. "I need to see him," Amelia said. "This Mr. Alcott. I need to thank him." The nurse nodded. "He's here. I'll let him know you're awake." She left, and Amelia was alone with her thoughts. Who was this man who had saved her? Why was he in that isolated area at the exact moment she fell? Was it a coincidence, or was there something more? And Edward, did he know she had survived? Was he looking for her? The questions swirled in her mind as the door opened again, and a tall man of about 40 entered, with dark hair peppered with grey at the temples and eyes that seemed to calculate everything around him. Richard Alcott watched her with an expression Amelia couldn't decipher. There was concern, but also something more. Curiosity, recognition. "Amelia Vance," he said, and it wasn't a question. He knew who she was. Amelia stared at the man before her with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Richard Alcott had an imposing presence, the kind of person accustomed to being in control. He wore casual but clearly expensive clothes, and a small scar above his right eyebrow suggested a life that hadn't always been easy. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice still weak. He came closer, pulling a chair to the bedside. "I saw your wallet floating in the water when I rescued you. I needed to identify you to get proper medical care." It made sense, but Amelia sensed there was more. "Why were you there, in that isolated place, at the exact moment I fell?" Richard smiled slightly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was sailing along the coast. I've had a boat docked in the Keys for a few weeks. I was testing a route when I saw a figure fall from the cliff." He paused. "It was luck, or fate, if you believe in that sort of thing." Amelia wanted to believe it, but something in the way he spoke, the way he avoided direct eye contact, suggested he was leaving parts of the story out. "Where am I exactly?" "This house." "It's mine," Richard interrupted. "I have a few properties in the area. This is the most discreet one. I thought it was better to bring you here instead of a hospital, given the circumstances." He let the sentence hang. Amelia understood, he knew, or suspected, that her fall hadn't been a simple accident, that something more sinister was involved. "My husband," she began, but Richard held up a hand. "You need to rest first. We'll talk later. Your recovery is the priority." But Amelia couldn't rest. Not while Edward thought she was gone, that his plan had succeeded. "Does he know I'm alive?" Richard hesitated before answering. "I don't think so. When I rescued you, I was careful not to be seen. Your husband was still at the top of the cliff, on the phone, apparently in a panic, or faking a panic." The comment revealed more than Richard probably intended. He had been watching Edward. For how long? Since when? "Do you know my husband?" Amelia asked directly. Richard stood up, walking to the window. The view showed the ocean as beautiful as it was dangerous. "Edward Martin and I did business in the past," he finally said. "It didn't end well." It was a vague answer, deliberately incomplete. Amelia tried to sit up, ignoring the pain. "What kind of business?" Richard turned to face her. "The kind that taught me not to trust men like him, the kind that ruined a project and cost a lot of people a lot of money." There was bitterness in his voice, but also something else. Determination. "So you have personal reasons for helping me," Amelia concluded. "It wasn't pure altruism, there was an agenda." Richard nodded slowly. "I have reasons to want to see Edward Martin face the consequences of his actions, but I also have principles. When I saw you fall, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was only thinking about saving a life." He approached the bed again. "But now that you're here, safe, yes, I'll admit I saw an opportunity, a chance to finally expose the kind of man he really is." Amelia should have been scared. She should have questioned Richard's motives, distrusted his plans. But the truth was he had saved her life when no one else was there. And more importantly, he seemed to be the only person who understood Edward's nature, who knew his capacity for manipulation and destruction. "What are you proposing?" she asked. Richard smiled, this time more genuinely. "That we work together. You have personal motives. I have resources. Together, we can ensure that Edward answers for everything he's done, not just to you, but to everyone he's harmed over the years." The days that followed were for physical recovery and mental preparation. Amelia remained at Richard's house, cared for, by the nurse and a small discreet staff. No one else knew she was alive. As her body healed, her mind worked tirelessly. Richard brought her a laptop and a secure phone. Amelia began to research, to piece together a puzzle she never knew she was assembling. Edward's debts were far worse than she had imagined. He owed millions to investors, banks, even private individuals. The developments he had managed over the last decade followed a pattern. They started with great marketing, attracted significant investment, but were never completed as promised. The money vanished, funneled into offshore accounts, used to cover holes in previous projects. It was a pyramid scheme disguised as legitimate real estate business, and Amelia, unknowingly, had become part of its support structure. Her assets used as collateral, her name used to lend credibility. She had been an essential piece in keeping the charade going. Richard revealed more details about his history with Edward. 5 years ago, they had been partners in a resort project in Islamorada. Richard had provided significant capital, Edward the local expertise and contacts. The project collapsed when they discovered Edward had diverted funds to other personal investments. Richard had lost not only money but also his credibility in the market. It had taken him years to rebuild his reputation. "Why didn't you report him then?" Amelia asked. Richard sighed. "I tried, but Edward is skilled at covering his tracks. He always has expensive lawyers, always has someone willing to lie for him. And I didn't have enough proof. But now things were different. Amelia had recordings, she had documents, and most importantly, she had the testimony of an insider, someone Edward thought was dead." Richard brought in a trusted lawyer, Henry Barrows, Eskingshire, who specialized in complex corporate fraud cases. The 60-year-old, man with graying hair and reading glasses hanging around his neck, analyzed every document with meticulous attention. "This is solid," he said finally. "With these recordings and the financial documents, we can build a strong case. But we need more. We need someone from the inside willing to testify." That's when Amelia remembered Jennifer. Edward's mistress was also involved in the scheme, but was she a willing participant or another victim? Amelia proposed a risky idea. Contact Jennifer directly. Richard hesitated. She could warn Edward. She could ruin everything. Amelia knew the risk, but she had a hunch. "Let me try. Woman to woman. She needs to understand that Edward is using her just as much as he used me." They got Jennifer's number through Richard's contacts. Amelia called from a private number, her heart pounding. Jennifer answered with a soft, confused voice. "Hello." Amelia took a deep breath. Jennifer, my name is Amelia Vance, Edward Martin's wife. Or ex-wife, I suppose. There was a shocked silence on the other end. You're... But he said you were... Jennifer's voice trailed off. He said I was gone? Amelia completed bitterly. Yes, he probably did, but I'm alive, and I have some truths to share with you. The meeting was set for a quiet cafe in Key Largo, far from the prying eyes of their usual circles. Amelia was nervous, still feeling pain from the fall, but determined. Richard and his lawyer waited at a distant table, ready to intervene if necessary. Jennifer arrived on time, a beautiful 25-year-old woman in designer clothes, but with eyes that revealed insecurity. She sat across from Amelia, studying her face with a mixture of guilt and curiosity. You're really alive, she murmured. I thought that he had succeeded? Amelia asked bluntly. Jennifer looked away. I didn't know it was going to be like that. He said it would just be a quiet divorce, that you would agree to everything, that it was just paperwork. Amelia laughed humorlessly. And you believed him? After all the lies he tells? Jennifer blushed. I love him. Or loved him. I don't know anymore. Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. Everything seemed so perfect at first. He was attentive, generous. He promised me a future together as soon as he resolved his marital situation. Amelia felt a pang of compassion. Jennifer was young, clearly naive. Edward had chosen his victims well. He's using you, Amelia said gently, just like he used me, just like he uses everyone around him. Do you know about the debts, about the investors he's cheated? Jennifer shook her head. He always said business was going well, that soon we'd be free to live the life we deserve. Amelia opened the folder she had brought, sliding documents across the table. This is the reality. Millions in debt, phantom investments. And you, Jennifer, are listed as a director of 3 shell companies. If this is investigated, you'll be held accountable along with him. Jennifer's face paled. As she flipped through the papers, I didn't know. He asked me to sign some documents, said it was to formalize our partnership, but I didn't. Her voice broke. My God, what have I done? Amelia placed a hand on hers. You were manipulated, just like I was. But there's still time to do the right thing, to help expose the truth. Jennifer looked up, tears streaming down her face. What do you want from me? Amelia took a deep breath. Your testimony. Everything you know about his business, the conversations you overheard, the documents you signed. In return, my lawyer will help you. He'll protect you from the legal consequences, as long as you cooperate fully. It was a decisive moment. Jennifer could refuse, could run to Edward, could destroy any chance Amelia had at justice. But after long minutes of silence, she nodded. Okay, I'll help. But he can't know I've spoken to you, not until we're ready. He's dangerous when he feels cornered. Amelia agreed. No one will know, not even that I'm alive for now. That's our advantage. Jennifer wiped her tears, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked determined. I have access to his office, to the computers. I can get more documents, emails, call logs, anything you need. In the following weeks, Jennifer became an unlikely but valuable ally. She fed information to Richard and his lawyer, always careful not to raise suspicion. They discovered that Edward was planning to leave the country as soon as he could liquidate some assets. He already had fake passports, foreign accounts, an elaborate escape route. Amelia's fall from the cliff had been just one part of a larger plan to disappear. He intended to feign mourning for a few weeks, liquidate everything he could, and then vanish with Jennifer to start over in another country. Or at least that's what he had told her. Most likely, Jennifer would also be discarded at the appropriate time. Amelia also discovered something unsettling about her own pregnancy. The dates didn't perfectly align with the timeline of her relations with Edward. There was a possibility, small but real, that the baby was not his. Months ago, during a solo business trip to New York City, before she realized the extent of Edward's betrayal, she had met someone at an architecture event. It was brief, a night of conversation and connection that she had immediately regretted. She had never mentioned it to Edward, certain he would never find out. But now, doing the math, The doubt consumed her. What if the baby belonged to someone else? Would it change anything? Would she love this child any less? The answer was clear, no. Regardless of the biological father, this baby was hers, and she would protect it with all her strength. Medical exams indicated that the pregnancy was progressing well, despite the trauma. The baby was strong, resilient. Like its mother, Amelia thought with a sad smile. Richard's nurse, Anna, a 50-year-old woman with a motherly demeanor, cared for her with dedication. "You're a warrior," she would say while checking Amelia's vital signs. "Few people would survive what you went through. This baby is lucky to have you as a mother." The words warmed Amelia's heart, reminding her why she was fighting. Richard also proved to be more complex than she had initially imagined. He was a successful businessman, but there was a loneliness in his eyes, a wound that hadn't healed. One evening, during dinner on the porch of the house overlooking the moonlit sea, he told her more about himself. He had been married once, years ago. His wife had left, not through death, but by choice, for another life with another man. The betrayal had marked him deeply, made him suspicious, closed off. "That's why I understand your pain," he told Amelia. "I know what it's like to love someone and discover it was all a lie, that you were just a character in someone else's story." Amelia realized she was developing feelings for Richard. It wasn't love, not yet, but something between gratitude, respect, and admiration. He had saved her, protected her, offered the resources for her revenge. But more than that, he treated her as an equal, as someone capable of making her own decisions, of fighting for herself. He was the opposite of Edward, who had always infantilized her, treated her like an ornament. "Richard," she said that night, "thank you for everything. I know you have your reasons, but still, you saved my life." He looked at her intently. "Amelia, you saved your own life. I was just in the right place at the right time. The rest is all you." The plan was finally taking shape. Henry Barrows had enough documents for an extensive civil lawsuit. Amelia's recordings proved the emotional and financial manipulation. Jennifer's testimony would expose the corporate schemes, and Amelia's appearance, alive, would destroy any narrative Edward tried to build. They would schedule a public hearing where everything would be revealed, the press would be invited. Edward Martin, the respected entrepreneur, would be exposed as the manipulator he truly was. His reputation would be ruined, his businesses would crumble. And finally, after years of hurting people, he would face real consequences. But there was one more revelation that had shaken Amelia. Mrs. Celia, the housekeeper who had worked in her home for years, whom she considered almost family, had known everything. Richard's investigations had discovered that Celia had been receiving extra payments from Edward, not to spy directly, but to keep quiet about things she saw and heard. Jennifer's visits when Amelia was away, the tense phone calls, the scattered documents. Celia knew and had said nothing, her loyalty bought for a price. When Amelia found out, she felt the floor disappear from under her again. Someone she had trusted, who had slept under her roof, shared meals, known her secrets, had chosen money over the truth. It was a betrayal that hurt as much as Edward's, because it came from where Amelia had least expected it. The morning of the hearing dawned overcast in Miami, as if the sky itself anticipated the drama about to unfold. Amelia was at Richard's house, mentally preparing for what was to come. She had spent 3 months in hiding, 3 months during which Edward believed his plan had worked. In that time, he had done exactly as they expected. He had cried crocodile tears in interviews, organized a touching memorial service, quietly sold off properties and prepared his escape. But today, it would all come crashing down. Henry Barrows arrived early with the team. In addition to lawyers, there were press advisors, crisis communication experts, and even a videographer to document everything. "Remember," the lawyer instructed Amelia for the 10th time, "you don't have to say anything but the truth. Let the documents speak, let the recordings speak. Your presence alone will be devastating for him." Amelia nodded, dressing in the discreet yet elegant suit Richard had bought for the occasion. She was thinner, her face marked by the experience, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was the strength of someone who had survived the worst and decided not just to live, but to fight. Richard, of course, would accompany her. He would be in the front row, ready to testify when called. Jennifer, too, nervous but determined, had arrived early and was waiting in a separate room. She had provided the final piece of the puzzle. Emails where Edward openly discussed his plans, recorded conversations where he instructed Jennifer on how to manipulate documents, bank transfers showing the systematic diversion of funds. It was more than enough. It was devastating. The Miami-Dade County courthouse was bustling when they arrived. The hearing was in a civil court, where Amelia was suing Edward for marital fraud, misuse of assets, financial manipulation, and abandonment in a situation of danger. They weren't direct criminal charges, but the evidence presented would pave the way for deeper investigations by the authorities. The press was already there, dozens of cameras and reporters waiting. Edward Martin was well known in Miami. His downfall would be a public spectacle. Amelia entered through a side entrance as planned. No one saw her yet. She would wait for the right moment, the exact time when her appearance would cause the maximum impact. Through a monitor, she could see the courtroom filling up. She recognized some faces. Investors Edward had cheated, partners he had betrayed, even her mother, who had flown in from Atlanta upon learning her daughter was alive. The reunion with Beatrice the night before had been emotional. Tears, tight hugs, apologies for not having seen the signs. "He fooled us all," Amelia had said, "but now he's going to pay." Edward arrived punctually, dressed impeccably, flanked by his expensive lawyers. He had the posture of someone convinced he would emerge victorious. After all, in his mind there was no Amelia left to contest his version of events. There were no witnesses from the cliff. It was his word against nothing. He greeted some of the attendees with that charming smile, that false humility that had deceived so many. He sat at the defense table, adjusted his tie and prepared for another performance. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Marcus Powell, a 65-year-old man with a reputation for being strict but fair. He surveyed the room with experienced eyes, sensing the tension in the air. "Good morning, everyone. We will now begin the hearing for case number," he cited the numbers, "where the plaintiff is Amelia Vance Martin and the defendant is Edward Martin." Edward frowned slightly. Where was the plaintiff's representative? Only Henry Barrows was at the table. Was she a no-show, a postponement? Henry Barrows stood up. "Your Honor, before we begin the formal proceedings, I would like to present an extraordinary piece of evidence that will completely change the nature of this case." The judge leaned forward, curious. Edward's lawyers exchanged confused glances. "Proceed." Henry Barrows gestured to the side door. Amelia took a deep breath. This was it. Richard gave her hand a brief, encouraging squeeze. "You've got this." She nodded and walked toward the door. When Amelia Vance walked into the courtroom, the silence was absolute. It lasted only seconds before erupting into shocked murmurs. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered urgently into their microphones. Amelia's mother sobbed loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. But Amelia only had eyes for Edward. She saw the blood drain from his face. She saw his hands grip the table, his knuckles turning white. She saw the exact moment panic set in. He muttered something inaudible, then louder. "No, it's not possible." Amelia walked to the prosecution table and sat beside Henry Barrows. Her voice, when she spoke, was firm. "Good morning, Edward. Surprised to see me?" The room was in an uproar. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Edward's lawyers jumped to their feet, demanding explanations, questioning her identity, claiming fraud. But Henry Barrows was prepared. He presented identification documents, medical records, all certified and authenticated. Amelia Vance was alive, and she was there to testify. The judge, recovering from the initial shock, ordered absolute silence. "Mrs. Martin, we all believed that you were no longer with us. Can you explain what happened?" Amelia nodded and began. She told them everything. The marriage that began with love but turned into a prison, The gradual isolation from friends and family, the discoveries about the debts and the assets used as collateral without her knowledge, the affair with Jennifer, the conversations she overheard about a plan involving her, the trip to the Florida Keys under false pretenses, and finally, the cliff. Edward's admission of his intentions, the fall, the cold water, the rescue. The room was completely silent as she spoke. Every word was a blow to Edward's carefully constructed facade. When she finished, Henry Barrows began presenting the evidence. First, the recordings. Edward's voice was unmistakable. "It would have been an accident. You would have tripped, fallen. Accidents happen, and I would have been free." The words echoed through the room. People gasped. Cameras focused on Edward, who was pale, sweating, clearly in shock. His lawyers tried to object, claiming the recording was obtained illegally, but the judge silenced them. "I will review all evidence before ruling on admissibility." Then came the financial documents. Every questionable transfer, every loan using Amelia's assets, every shell company, every diversion of funds. It was an empire of lies meticulously documented. Richard was called to testify about his history with Edward, about the failed project years ago, about the repeated patterns of behavior. His voice was calm but firm, presenting facts, not emotions. He wasn't there for personal revenge. He was there for the truth. Then it was Jennifer's turn. She entered the room with her head down, avoiding Edward's gaze. She sat in the witness chair and, in a trembling but determined voice, told her side of the story. How she had met Edward at a business event. How he had seduced her with promises of a future together. How he had entangled her in his schemes without her realizing the extent of what she was doing. "He had me sign documents, saying it was to formalize our partnership. I trusted him. I loved him. Or I thought I did." Tears streamed down her face. "He used me, just like he used Amelia, just like he used everyone who trusted him." Edward finally stood up, unable to contain himself. "That's a lie. They're all liars. Amelia is clearly traumatized, making up stories. And Jennifer," he pointed at her furiously, "she's an opportunist trying to hurt me because I ended our relationship." But his defense sounded hollow. There was too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many patterns. Henry Barrows calmly presented more documents, including emails where Edward discussed his plans with Jennifer, text messages where he planned his escape from the country, even copies of fake passports he had prepared. The judge studied each piece of evidence with meticulous attention. He asked pointed questions, investigated inconsistencies, and assessed the credibility of each witness. Nearly 5 hours into the hearing, he finally spoke. "Rarely in my 25 years on the bench have I encountered a case of such complexity and gravity. The evidence presented by Mrs. Martin is substantial and preliminarily appears credible. Mr. Martin, you will have the opportunity to present your full defense, but I must warn you that what I have heard today is profoundly disturbing." He ordered immediate measures, a freeze on all of Edward's assets, a ban on him leaving the country, and the forwarding of all evidence to the district attorney's office to evaluate potential criminal charges. Edward tried to protest, but his lawyers silenced him, knowing any further words would only worsen his situation. When the hearing was adjourned, Edward was escorted out by security, surrounded by cameras and shouted questions from reporters. His mask had finally fallen. There was no more pretending. The empire of lies was crumbling, brick by brick, broadcast live for the entire country to see. Amelia left through the side exit, avoiding the bulk of the press, but she gave a brief interview, choosing her words carefully. "I want other women to know they are not alone. That emotional manipulation is real and devastating, that isolation is a form of control, and that there is always a way out, always hope for rebuilding. I survived to tell my story, and I hope my story helps others recognize the signs before it's too late." The cameras captured every word. By morning, Amelia Vance would be a headline across the nation. The woman who came back from the dead to expose an empire of lies. In the weeks that followed, more of Edward's victims began to emerge. Other cheated investors, other betrayed partners, even other women he had emotionally manipulated over the years. Each testimony added more weight to the case. The newspapers called it the biggest corporate scandal in Miami in a decade. Edward tried to defend himself, hired more lawyers, made public statements proclaiming his innocence, but it was useless. There was too much evidence, too many witnesses, too much truth. Amelia focused on her own recovery. The following months were dedicated to rebuilding her life piece by piece. She reached out to her old friends, explaining, apologizing for the forced distance. Many welcomed her back with open arms, happy to have her in their lives again. Others were resentful, but Amelia accepted it. She understood that her choices, even under manipulation, had consequences. She would work to regain those relationships if possible. If not, she would move on. Her mother stayed in Miami for a few weeks, helping Amelia process everything that had happened. Beatrice was a strong woman who had raised Amelia alone after her father left when she was a child. She saw the same resilience in her daughter. "You're a Vance," she would say, "and we Vances don't bow down. We fall, but we always get up." The words echoed in Amelia's mind every time doubt assailed her, every time the fear of the future paralyzed her. She was a Vance, a survivor. The baby was growing healthily. Amelia had regular checkups, following each development with a mix of anxiety and joy. She still didn't know who the biological father was. She would do a DNA test after the birth, not for legal obligation, but for the personal need to know the truth. But regardless of the result, this child would be loved. It would be raised with honesty, with respect, with freedom. Everything Amelia hadn't had in her marriage. Richard remained a constant presence in her life, but they both understood that any romantic relationship would be premature. Amelia needed to rebuild herself on her own first, to rediscover who she was outside of a relationship, outside of others' expectations. Richard respected that. "I'll be here," he had said, "as a friend, as an ally, as whatever you need me to be. No pressure, no demands." It was the kind of support Amelia had never had with Edward, the kind that respected her autonomy instead of suffocating it. Jennifer was also on her own journey of reconstruction. After testifying, she had completely distanced herself from Edward and everything related to him. She started therapy, worked with Henry Barrows to legally protect herself from the consequences of her unwitting actions. In a chance meeting at a cafe weeks after the hearing, she and Amelia talked at length. "I'm so sorry," Jennifer had said, tears in her eyes. "For everything. For being a part of it." Amelia held her hand. "We were both his victims, in different ways, but victims nonetheless. I won't pretend everything is forgiven and forgotten, but I understand, and I hope you find your way, just as I'm finding mine." The revelation about Mrs. Celia was harder to process. Amelia decided to confront her, not out of anger, but for the need for closure. They met at the South Beach penthouse, which now legally belonged solely to Amelia, as Edward had lost rights to marital assets. Celia arrived nervously, knowing why she had been summoned. "I'm sorry, Amelia," she began before even sitting down. "I'm sorry I kept quiet. I'm sorry I took his money." Amelia watched her, this woman who had cleaned her house, prepared her meals, seen her most vulnerable moments. "Why, Celia? You knew me. You knew what he was doing. Why didn't you tell me?" Celia began to cry. "Because I have debts, because my daughter is sick and needs expensive treatment, because Edward threatened me, said he would fire me without references if I said anything. And I'm a 50-year-old housekeeper, Amelia. How many doors open for someone like me?" It was an explanation, not an excuse. Amelia knew that. "I understand the pressures you were facing," she said finally, "but that doesn't make what you did right. You had choices, even if they were difficult, and you chose silence." Celia nodded, accepting the judgment. Amelia sighed. "I'll help you with your daughter's debts. Not because you deserve it, but because she does. But we can't work together anymore. I need people around me whom I can trust completely." It was a bitter but necessary farewell. 6 months after the initial hearing, Edward's case was well underway in the judicial system. He would face multiple charges, including corporate fraud, document manipulation, and yes, the evidence from the cliff was being investigated for attempted grievous bodily harm. His lawyers tried to negotiate plea deals, but Amelia was clear. There would be no deals. She wanted the case to go to trial, for every truth to be exposed, for every consequence to be faced. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that others wouldn't suffer what she had suffered. Amelia resumed her career as an architect. At first it was difficult. 5 years away from the market had left her skills rusty, her contacts outdated. But she was talented, she always had been, and now she had something more, a powerful story of resilience. Firms wanted to hire her, not just for her work, but for what she represented. She turned down many offers, choosing carefully where she wanted to be. Finally, she accepted a position at a mid-sized firm specializing in sustainable residential projects, something with purpose, something that made a difference. The baby was born on a rainy autumn morning, a healthy boy with dark eyes and a strong cry. Amelia held him for the first time and felt all the wounds of the past few months begin to scar over. Not fully healed, they never would be, but healing. She named him Henry, in honor of the lawyer who had helped her reclaim her voice, and Vance, because he would carry her name, not his father's. The DNA test would later confirm that the child was not Edward's. He belonged to the architect she had briefly met in New York. She contacted him, informed him of his son's existence. He was shocked but willing to meet the child, to be a part of his life if Amelia allowed it. They would discuss arrangements when Henry was older. For now, he was all hers, her reason for surviving, her motivation to keep fighting. A year after the fateful trip to the Florida Keys, Amelia was standing on a TEDx stage in Miami. The auditorium was packed. Cameras were live streaming. She looked out at the audience, recognizing faces. Richard was there, smiling, encouragingly. Her mother Beatrice with tears of pride in her eyes. Jennifer, who had become an unlikely friend. Henry Barros. Even some of the former friends she had reconnected with. And she began to speak. "My name is Amelia Vance. A year ago I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be at the bottom of the ocean, another statistic, another silenced woman. But I am here. I survived. And my story, as painful as it is, needs to be told." She narrated her journey, not with self-pity but with raw honesty. She spoke about the signs she ignored, about how love blinded her to manipulation, about how financial dependence became a trap, about how isolation left her vulnerable, and about how, even at rock bottom, even falling from a literal and metaphorical cliff, she found the strength to climb back up. "I've learned that rebuilding isn't a destination," she continued. "It's a continuous journey. Some days are easier than others. Some days I still feel fear. I still question my choices. I still look at my son and wonder what kind of world I'm bringing him into. But I've also learned that strength isn't never falling. It's falling and choosing to get back up. It's being broken and choosing to rebuild. It's losing everything and choosing to start again." The audience was completely silent, absorbing every word. If you are in a relationship that doesn't feel right, where you feel smaller and smaller, more and more isolated, more and more dependent, I implore you, pay attention to those signs, seek help, talk to friends, family, professionals, because isolation is the first weapon of manipulators. They cut you off from everyone who could show you the truth. They convince you that you are the problem, that you are weak, that you need them. But you don't. You are strong. You have value. You deserve true love, not control disguised as affection. Amelia finished her talk with her eyes shining. "My story had an ending of reconstruction, but I recognized that I had privileges many do not. I had resources, allies, a system that eventually worked. Not everyone has that. That's why part of my mission now is to create support networks for women in situations of emotional manipulation and control. With the Vance Institute, which I am founding, we will work to identify early signs, offer legal and psychological support, and create safe exit paths, because no one should have to go through what I went through, and if they do, they should have all the help possible to survive and thrive." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Amelia came down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories, thank her for her courage, offer support for the Institute. Richard was waiting for her backstage with Henry in his arms, who was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the impact his mother was making. "You were incredible," he said. Amelia smiled, taking her son. "It was liberating. I finally feel like I've turned pain into purpose." Richard kissed her forehead gently, a gesture of friendship, perhaps hinting at something more in the future, but with no pressure, no expectations. In the following months, the Vance Institute became a reality. With donations from people inspired by her story and support from organizations working on related causes, Amelia created a robust structure. They offered free legal consulting, psychological support, even temporary housing for women needing to leave dangerous situations. She became a frequent speaker, sharing her experience, but also amplifying the voices of other survivors. Each story was unique, but the patterns were sadly similar. Manipulation, isolation, financial control, gaslighting, and always the feeling of being trapped in a life that wasn't one's own. Edward's trial finally arrived 2 years after the initial hearing. This time Amelia did not attend. She didn't need to. She had given her testimony. She had presented her evidence. She had retold her story countless times. Now it was time to let justice take its course. She was at home with Henry when she received the call from Henry Barrows. Convicted, on all counts. He's going to answer. For it, Amelia, he's finally going to answer. She felt relief but not triumph. There was no real victory there, only the closing of a painful chapter. Edward would face consequences, but that didn't undo the harm he had caused. It didn't give back the years Amelia had lost. It didn't completely heal the wounds, but it was something. It was justice. Amelia never saw Edward again after that initial hearing. She preferred it that way. He was part of her past, a significant part that had shaped her but did not define her. She was more than the woman who had survived him. She was an architect, a mother, an activist, a speaker, an institute founder. She was a friend, a daughter, a confidant. She was someone who had fallen to the bottom and chosen to climb back, stronger, wiser, more complete. Richard and Amelia eventually developed a romantic relationship, but it was gradual, built on a solid foundation of friendship and mutual respect. No overwhelming passion that blinded reason, no rushed promises. Just two adults with complex histories choosing to walk together, each maintaining their individuality, each respecting the other's boundaries. It was a mature kind of love, the kind that doesn't suffocate but liberates. The kind Amelia now understood was the only true kind. 3 years after that stormy night in the Florida Keys, Amelia stood on another cliff, but this time by choice. It was a different place, on the Gulf Coast, with a view of a spectacular sunset. Henry, now a chatty 2-year-old, ran across the grass chasing butterflies. Richard stood beside her, his hand intertwined with hers, and Amelia realized she no longer felt fear. Not of heights, not of cliffs, not of new beginnings. There were scars, there always would be, but they were part of her story. Proof that she had survived, proof that she had moved on, proof that it was possible to fall and rebuild, stronger than before. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked gently. Amelia smiled, looking at the horizon where the sky met the sea. "I'm thinking that I finally feel free, truly free." And it was true. She was no longer the victim of the cliff. She was the woman who had survived, who had fought, who had won. She was Amelia Vance, complete, whole, free.